states of Ohio. Climate services is very important to all of us here. And so it's great to be with you and to be able to do this today. Obviously, this is a monthly event, really providing these climate services to the north central U.S. And it's really a collaboration activity among many partners, NCEI, National Weather Service, NIDIS, USDA, OAR, the climate hubs, American Association of State Climatologists, the Midwest and High Plains Regional Climate Centers, and the National Drought Mitigation Center. And obviously, all of these partners working actively throughout the region in the area of climate services. Our next regular drought and climate outlook webinar will be a month from now. This is will be June 17th at 1 p.m. Central. And our good friend, Stu Foster, Kentucky State climatologist, will be delivering that outlook. And for those that don't know, Stu is moving on, retiring. So certainly we wish him all the best, but we're going to capture his attention, and he's going to capture our attention one more time here. So you can always find some more access to these and future climate webinars at the links provided there. And again, we're going to be open, have some open time for questions here at the end. So I thought I'd start off, maybe a little bit unusual and actually show a satellite picture taken just a couple of minutes ago, a couple hours ago, actually, really just welcoming very quickly the Gulf of Mexico to some of the northern states. This is certainly a different pattern that we've seen over the majority of the last month, if not longer. We've got strong high pressure systems sitting out here into the southeast and eastern and clockwise motion around that, just really bringing up some moisture into locations that certainly could use some moisture. A little wet for others, parts of Kansas and Missouri for sure, but getting some moisture up into the upper Midwest, that is going to be certainly beneficial and something that we need to see. So today we're going to do what we usually do, look at a climate recap and some recent conditions. Then we're going to take a look at the impacts of these conditions hydrologically, look at snow and water, agricultural impacts, a little bit of fire as well throughout the region, and mention some other tidbits from our partners around the central U.S. Then we'll take a look at the outlooks, hot off the presses, both the short term, the monthly, and also the summer updates there as well. So recent climate conditions. Yeah, so a lot of us have certainly seen dry conditions. This photo courtesy of Pete Boulay up there in Minnesota, certainly an area that has seen recently dry conditions that have been impacting some agricultural activity up that way. So if we look at the April temperature recap here, this is looking at the statewide average temperature ranks for April 2020, compared, basically ranked for all years between 1895 and 2021. So you can see all of the white shadings here with various numbers ranging from 48 to 80-ish are close to average for a large portion of the central region. So many states overall, the month of April was pretty average. Above average across the Great Lakes and the far eastern Corn Belt region, like myself here sitting in central Ohio, but below average on the flip side of that for our friends in Kansas. And so sort of a gradient across the region, with much of the region seeing a close to average April. A lot of this, and I'm not showing it here, but minimum temperatures, overnight temperatures were pretty below average, even more states than just Kansas here across the western states, and that kept temperatures on the chilly side here for the month of April. Looking at April precipitation, in a word, dry for the most part. We only have one state there, Minnesota, with above average precipitation for the month of April. Most of us were below average. A couple of states, Wisconsin down to Missouri, that were near average, but most of us were above, much below average in terms of precipitation. Iowa sticking out there with the 13th driest April on record for the state. So pretty dry, continued dry across Montana, the Dakotas, Wyoming, Colorado, and even the Central Plains as well. So mostly dry conditions during the month of April. Looking at the 3-month February to April recap here, pretty much again near to below average for the western states. So folks in Kansas and in Wyoming, below average. Most of the region close to average, and then the warmth over the 3-month period concentrated around the Great Lakes, at least the warmth relative to the long-term means, or in terms of ranking, sorry, in those tiers. Certainly the Great Lakes sticking out as above average north and east as well. And then again, looking at the precip, a little bit different here, more stratified north to south. Clearly, what stands out is the driest 3-month February through April period on record there for North Dakota, and very dry conditions in Montana, the 11th driest 3-month period there for the state of Montana, and continued dryness across South Dakota, Iowa, and also Michigan and Ohio. On the flip side, the southern tier, just a sort of an active storm track across our southern states in the region of Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, stretching over into Kentucky as well, seeing above average for this 3-month period. Now, heading into this 3-month period, obviously we were looking at typical, thinking about La Nina conditions, which often bring wetter conditions to the Ohio Valley. A little bit different this year, certainly not the exact pattern we typically see, but still providing dryness in areas that we expected across the north as well. So this is what the last 3 months in terms of precipitation look like. So let's get a little bit more recent here, just looking at the last 30 days. Of note, the two little bullseyes that stick out here in northwest Missouri and also central Missouri, those are some data issues, so we want to ignore those. But generally, if you were following last month, most of the region was above average, and what I just showed you, what we've seen since mid-April till now is really a reversal of that. Below average across most of the region. The only area is a little bit above average there in southwest Colorado and southwest Wyoming. All of the greens indicating anywhere from close to average down to about 4 degrees below average. And then the blues and purples here in the eastern Corn Belt region getting up into that 4 to 8 degrees below average over the last 30 days. So really quite chilly for May, and that's led to some issues that we'll get to in just a moment in the agricultural section. Looking at the recent conditions in terms of precip, so on the left, this is precipitation total for the last month. We can see all of the widespread reds and oranges really indicating much less than 2 inches for a lot of locations across the Dakotas and northern Minnesota, really less than a ½ inch or even 1/10 of an inch in those darkest red spots there, and also there in southwest Colorado, just indicating how dry it's been, how little precipitation has fallen. And we get a sense of that compared to where we should be with the percent of normal on the right-hand side. Mostly red, mostly orange. Places that stick out there, we look at the front range of Colorado there, northeast Colorado, eastern Colorado, also along southern Missouri into western Kentucky, and then that stretch across, say, central Illinois through northern Indiana, north central Ohio, seeing heavier rainfall. But generally, it has been dry, and so one could argue the cool temperatures over the last month have really helped limit probably even more rapidly expanding drought conditions, considering how dry it has been. So the cool temperatures have tempered that just a little bit, despite those very dry conditions that we see. There were some recent records, some interesting records, certainly here in Ohio. We don't often see snowfall in May, let alone 5 to 7 inches of snowfall in May. And certainly a lot of leaves and a lot of trees were out at the time. These are eastern redbuds, which were absolutely gorgeous this year. But Toledo saw its largest late season snowfall of around 5 inches. We had 2.3 inches of snow in Cincinnati, which broke the record going back to 1901. Very unusual conditions here there in late April. We had some all-time monthly record lows set as well. So I looked and pulled some data on our cold lows, given how cold it has been. For instance, on the 5th of May here, Marysville, Missouri dropped to 19 degrees. Divide Peak in Wyoming back again around that April 20th timeframe where it was very chilly and snowy, -9. Also an all-time monthly record low maximum high there in Tipton, so of only 42 degrees on the 10th of May. So this is just indicating those very chilly conditions really that have taken hold of the north central region over the last 30 days. One other thing to note, and a lot of folks are talking about this throughout the Midwest and perhaps other parts of the country as well, is also the overall general lack of severe weather across the U.S. We're about 200 tornado reports below average for the entire country. On this map, tornadoes are indicated by the red dots there, and we've really only had one or two for most of the states that typically see a few more by this point of the year. May is such a big month for storm activity, and because of the weather pattern and this persistent, basically what we call zonal or westerly flow, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for moisture to get up here in that clash of the air masses that we typically see in the month of May. So now with that said, there have been some significant reports. This happened just a couple of days ago here, again thanks to Pete Boulay there in Minnesota, but just across the border in Wisconsin, shovelable hail storm there. So certainly we haven't gone without severe. It's just been a bit on the weaker side or lesser side this year. So having looked at the conditions that we've seen recently, let's take a look at the hydrology. This is actually another shot from Northwest Ohio. Very unusual. We've been dry for a good 6 to 8 months, but some recent heavy rainfall led to ponding there. But the dryness in this region, of course, pales into comparison to what we're seeing and what you're seeing up there in the northern plains. So if we look at the soil moisture, this is a NASA product basically looking at the moisture percentile on the left of the top 100 centimeters. Those dark reds are just showing the percentiles of basically how often it's happened in this historical record. And North Dakota, eastern Montana, parts of northwest South Dakota really stand out. We've got that deep red area here around the Twin Cities in northern Iowa down to central Iowa that is also really stand out, and some really rapid drying taking place across the Chicago region and across southern Michigan, and continued dryness here in northwest Ohio and parts of eastern Ohio. We can see on the flip side, again, that southern tier from Colorado through Kansas, Missouri, and parts of central Illinois, soil moisture is actually doing is a lot higher in terms of the soil moisture that's available there than we saw earlier. So we have seen some recent minor improvements across parts of South Dakota, Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, and Nebraska, but some deteriorating conditions there to the northern tier. And we can see that also in our top soil moisture percent short to very short. Again, 81% short to very short there up in North Dakota, just in South Dakota, northern Minnesota, and Montana as well. Just very dry conditions there. Much less so now across the eastern Corn Belt region, stretching back toward Missouri and Kansas. Now this one's sometimes a bit tricky here, thinking about evaporative demand drought index. This is an early or precursor for water stress. The way I think the easiest way to think about it is the thirst of the atmosphere. So what's the atmosphere? How much does the atmosphere want or thirst for that moisture that's there at the surface? And our cool conditions over the last month really have led to limiting any strong evaporation for the most part. And we can see a lot of areas white or blue, just indicating that because of those cool temperatures, the demand for that moisture was a little bit less than what we may have typically seen during this period of time. And so from an evaporative demand, it's much lower. So that's something that's been a little bit helpful over the last 30 days. But as we all know, a lot of us have rapidly switched now to much warmer conditions, and that evaporation and that demand for that moisture is certainly on the rise. Looking at the 28-day stream flows here across the region, certainly in my neck of the woods, the lower Great Lakes, Illinois through Indiana and Ohio, we've seen big improvements in our stream flows over the last 28 days compared to, say, the last 3 months. We saw some really record lows on a lot, especially for this time of the year, given that this area here in the eastern Corn Belt region typically sees our peak runoff during this period as well. Just to the north of us, though, that area from northeast Illinois, southeast Wisconsin into southern Michigan has really seen very rapid stream flows that are very rapidly falling stream flows there in that region. Also across portions of central Iowa, where rainfall has been lacking until really recently, the last couple of days here with a little bit of rainfall, but still plenty of indication that dry conditions remain across this region. And that extends up into the Twin Cities, northern Wisconsin, and then certainly northwest Minnesota, stretching back through the Dakotas and into eastern Montana. It certainly led to low flows there, continuing across the upper Missouri Basin. And then as we stretch down into the Colorado area, certainly we've been talking about now for the last month or two about the early melt out issues taking place across the western rivers there, the west side, and very low stream flows for this time of the year in that portion of Colorado. So taking a look at now data from our friends at the Corps, Kevin Grody giving us some information on the Missouri River snowpack here, both the above Fort Peck and also Fort Peck to Garrison. Really what they're looking at are these low runoff areas, upper basin above Sioux City, Iowa, runoff in May through the first 18 days of the month is about 50% of average. And so that's obviously something that's being discussed and thinking about system storage, primarily in the Fort Peck, Garrison, and Oahe, is decreasing rather than increasing. Typically increasing this time of the year, but is already decreasing. And so that's going to perhaps play into decisions about water and that sort of thing. The lower basin from Omaha to St. Louis is fairly wet, typical of this time in the springtime. So overall, the northern basin certainly showing much different conditions than the southern portion of the Missouri River Basin. Looking now over at the Platte River Basin and the mountain snowpack water content, again, both the north and the south are showing over 50% of peak snow water equivalent remaining in both areas, sort of holding on in that South Platte area, not melting out early. Some season, late season peaks due to some storms through that region. But big melt is expected due to the lateness of this season as well. So you can see that in the curve, certainly still above that 1981 to 2010 average in the South Platte region. So big melt still expected there as other areas continue to melt out over the next 30 days. Switching now over to the Great Lakes region, first focusing on the right-hand side. This is obviously we are free of our ice on our Great Lakes here. This is looking at our temperature data starting to get up certainly into the 60s there in our southern portion here in Lake Erie. Obviously still a bit colder farther to the north, well into the 50s and down into the 40s still. So chilly, but certainly iced out completely now. And of course, with Lake Erie attention, thinking about this summer and harmful algal blooms, the Lake Erie algal bloom, latest predicted bloom that came out just on the 17th of May, shows a value of 5 on their predicted bloom severity, which is, as you can see, based on years going back to 2002, certainly nowhere close to the peak harmful algal blooms that we reached in some years like 2015 and 2011. A large portion of that is because the Maumee River that flows into the Western Lake Erie Basin there had well below average March and April rain and those really snowpack to consider. So that led to smaller phosphorus loads in early spring into that portion of the basin. So we expect the harmful algal bloom there to be a bit lower than in years past. Now looking at the levels, over the last certainly year and a half to 2 years, a lot of attention on the lake levels and kind of this persistent shoreline flooding that's been taking place in a lot of our lakes. Over this past 30 days, this monthly mean values that you see here on the right, Lake Superior does continue to slowly rise right now after kind of peaking out, low peaking out earlier in April, late March. Other lakes continue to fall. Lake Michigan, Lake Erie, they continue to fall or remain fairly steady from their record levels. So certainly much higher record levels this time last year. And really that continued dryness throughout the Great Lakes region is allowing for these levels to drop. So we're I think in the business of always looking for those silver linings, but certainly the lake levels continue to drop. They will, these small little rises that are forecast based on this, what you see here on the right-hand side, perhaps a small bump in some other lakes, but that's expected this time of the year. It's just part of the natural cycle, part of the precip in spring as well, that leads to slight rises in the lakes. But again, all of these lakes are still trending down from those record highs, and that's helped mitigate that flooding, that shoreline flooding that's been taking place for a long time. Looking at our river forecast now, May through July, and looking at the greater than 50% chance of exceeding river flood levels. A lot of greens on this map indicating that there's not a huge flood potential right now. Minor to moderate flooding indicated by the orange and the red squares there from central Missouri through northwest Illinois. A lot of that, there's certainly recent heavier rainfall, and that continued flood risk there. It's typical of spring summer storm activity in that part of the region. So right now, overall, looking pretty good in terms of any flood threat on our major rivers throughout the region. So hot off the press this morning, our U.S. Drought Monitor was released. You can see the national look kind of shrunk into there in the upper left, just to give you an idea of the context. Large portion of our southern and eastern areas are not really concerned with any dry or drought conditions right now, but some areas are certainly feeling some extreme conditions here. And so if you look at the north central region here on the right-hand side, this is the kind of a zoom in close up of the current depiction. I want to talk about a couple of areas. Again, Drought Monitor still showing that the extreme drought across North Dakota, northern South Dakota, and eastern Montana. And now for only the third time, North Dakota has an area of D4, or exceptional drought. And if you've seen photos, and I'll show a couple of those areas, just some intense agricultural impacts for sure in that part of the country. We also have D4 category there across western Colorado. So these areas are suffering from short-term and long-term dryness at this point. And we can see on the left the class change over the 1 week. So that deterioration to D4 parts of North Dakota, evident there, some expansion across Minnesota as well. And then the other area that I want to point out, well, there's a couple. I don't want to leave anyone out here, but certainly the severe drought ongoing here in northwestern Iowa. And then this area from Chicago up into southwestern Michigan. So this is an area now of D2 severe drought. The springtime has been really pitiful, according to the National Weather Service there in Chicago, just over 2 inches of rain, which would make it the driest on record there. So very, very dry conditions and rapidly deteriorating conditions there as well. All right, so what about our impacts with agriculture? A couple of great photos of the haves and the have-nones. This is from Mary Knapp in Kansas, looking at a lot of moisture there, very heavy rainfall around Tribune, for instance. And on the flip side of that, looking at North Dakota, around Ward County, just really showing those effects of the D4 drought across the region. Looking at the latest USDA NASS crop progress reports, and thanks to Brad Rippey for providing those for us. Looking at winter wheat progress, continues to lag the 5-year average by about 8%, really because of those cold conditions that we've seen over the last 30 days, has really slowed that down. So in particular, looking at Kansas there with an 18% change difference. Really Illinois, the one standout there in terms of progress ahead of schedule in terms of percent headed. Looking at the conditions, I know here across the east, conditions are looking quite good from Illinois over to Ohio and really up into Michigan to this point. So conditions are still strong across the east. There's a lot of certainly chatter and conversation about disease pressure in the west and in Kansas and parts of Colorado, and folks not able to get out and spray and fungicides and things. So there's some issues there with the wheat. Looking at corn and soy, certainly the dry conditions have allowed for pretty efficient planting progress, but the percent emergence has been lagging, certainly in parts of the country, North Dakota, Nebraska, down into Missouri as well. Certainly here in Ohio, we're a little bit behind schedule. But for the most part, Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin still doing, strong progress, strong percent emerged. Similar on the soybeans, not so good across the far north, but most of the region is still right there. So overall, corn and soybeans are ahead of the 5-year average. Other areas that are a little bit behind, really due to those chilly temperatures and dry conditions out there, and the inability really to germinate. Some other crop progress here, looking at barley progress, pretty strong across parts of Minnesota, North Dakota, oats as well. A little bit more on the spring wheat progress, percent emerged, again, well ahead of the 5-year average there across Minnesota and even South Dakota, but not so much up there in Montana over those areas that have been suffering from the dryness as well. Looking at the pasture and range conditions, the percent poor to very poor, big standout there in South Dakota. Some degradation in those pasture range conditions across Montana, down to South Dakota as well. So tough pasture conditions across the northern plains continues. The North Dakota Agricultural Commissioner has reactivated the drought hotline. So for those folks that are interested, the drought hotline and the interactive hay map can be reached there at that link that you see in the bottom left. Spring leaf out and late freeze conditions. So thinking about this a little bit, pretty interesting banding from our National Phenological Network Spring Leaf Index anomaly here. So just basically looking at how fast is, how far ahead of schedule or behind schedule we were. Sort of these starts and stops of spring, right? Advance across the Gulf states, slow down, then the red again as we got warmer, and then the recent cool conditions really slowing things down there, and also on the western periphery. This map on the left looks at the date of the last 32-degree Fahrenheit temperature here across the region. Much of those yellows are showing the end of April, which here in the Eastern Corn Belt was pretty typical. But once we got these green dots here indicating May 1st through May 10th, it was a little bit late for the season. And many stations, all of these open circles you see here, they've reached 32 degrees within the last 14 days. So again, just highlighting those cold conditions, and now comparing that to this rapid switch in temperatures now in the mid to upper 80s, for instance, here across the Eastern Corn Belt region and most of us across the region. So cold conditions certainly slowing things down, and cold conditions causing some crop injury out there. So frost and freezing temperatures occurred on almost a daily basis in Michigan from the 8th through the 12th. There was a lot of high level of fear of damaged crops, although things have been, the reports are turning out, I think, better than expected from the information from folks up there. But certainly grapes, as you can see here in the middle, took a big hit. Also strawberry blooms, and I know here some apple blooms where the king blossoms kind of took the hit, but the secondary and tertiary blossoms are doing okay. We did get some corn and soy nipped as well. So this photo sent from Trent Ford there in Illinois, there in central Illinois, looking at that cold, getting that corn a little bit as well. So some minor damage so far, some heavier damage in some spots, certainly there across Michigan. But right now the reports are at least a little bit optimistic. So quickly, some other impacts: slow germination, uneven stands as these seeds sit in dry soils. I think this picture there in the bottom right clearly indicates that. Very poor water quality also in the stock ponds, and low to no surface water available. So water testing there reports out of South Dakota. We will have some replanting taking place scattered across the north central region. As far as the water issues go in Missouri, the mainstream reservoirs, they have some low water issues. So things like boat launches and water intakes are being adjusted for potential issues this summer. And flooding and erosion concerns across burn scar areas of the Front Range. Having the severe drought just a year ago, and now heavier rains falling across those burn scars, we can really see how those climate impacts or the drought impacts stack up in one kind of disaster leading to another in some aspects there. As far as wildfire, certainly those dry areas across the north are where there's a lot of focus. Very high fire danger across portions of Minnesota with burn restrictions. You can see here on the right, report of just a more recent fire here in LaCroix Ranger District. Lightning started, And of course, North Dakota to date, there have been more than 1,000, so 1,080 wildfires impacting over 100,000 acres there in North Dakota. And there's a great interactive map for those that would like to take a look at that as well. All right, so now we're going to wrap up with our outlooks, certainly looking at the conditions over the next 8 to 14 days, month, and our summer here. First, we'll talk about our good old friend ENSO, or El Nino and La Niña conditions. We're in ENSO neutral conditions. So for this, it just means we're going to dominate with these ENSO neutral conditions across the summer, and we are likely to see negligible impacts. There's some early indications that we'll slip back into La Niña, which is cooler than average sea surface temperatures down in the tropical Pacific and the equator that impact our weather patterns. But right now, those indications are a little too early to have strong confidence. So a little too early to tell there. So with that said, obviously the satellite picture I showed you of the nice flow around the high pressure system, Gulf of Mexico open in the next 7 days, the quantitative precipitation forecast from the Weather Prediction Center does indicate that stream of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico up through Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, and parts of Wisconsin, Minnesota. Of course, we've got a big storm taking place today across the glacier region, up to 1 foot of snow up there with some rain extending into the Dakotas as well. Much needed rain over some of these areas that are quite dry. So this is a good sign, good news here. Some rainfall across those areas. Lack of precipitation expected, really standing out here in that area from northeast Chicago through southern Michigan here. So likely to see worsening conditions in terms of drought in that portion of the country. Looking at the 8 to 14 day temperature and precipitation probabilities. Now, I want to note these probabilistic outlooks are now considered relative to essentially the National Weather Service, the new normal period of 1990. I should say 1991. Sorry about that, 1991 to 2020. So looking at that, we do carry the above average or high, I should say, a higher probability of warmer than average conditions across the Great Lakes and Eastern Corn Belt, and cooler than average conditions more likely across the Dakotas, Wyoming, Colorado, and up into Montana as well. Looking at the precipitation on the right-hand side, we see a big area from the Missouri Valley over the Ohio Valley of a higher probability of seeing above average precipitation in this portion, but really a large expansive area across much of the region from Minnesota, South Dakota, Iowa, of seeing those above, or I should say above average. The probabilities for above average precipitation are higher. More closer to average or even below average probability across Colorado, western Wyoming, and into parts of Montana over the next 8 to 14 days. And again, that's really leading through the Memorial Day weekend. No real risk to temperature, extreme temperatures or anything right now, so we're not expecting that across the region. There is a slight risk for heavy precipitation here across portions of Kansas, Missouri, and southern Illinois. So the areas that have been wet carry, again, a little bit higher risk of heavier precipitation in this period. So looking at the June outlook now, this just released today. Large expanse here on the left-hand side, most of the region carrying an elevated opportunity for above average temperatures, especially in parts of Colorado and back into Wyoming, but even still across the Dakotas, Nebraska, up into Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. If we look at the right-hand side and looking, certainly have a gradient of expected or probabilistic conditions across the region, much of the same. If it's going to be wet, higher confidence in wetter conditions across the Eastern Corn Belt region, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, extending down into Kentucky. Less so as we move westward, sort of equal chances there for a large portion of us, most of the Dakotas, Minnesota, down into Kansas, and then likely to be drier in those very dry areas across Montana, western North Dakota, and South Dakota as well, but also extending down into portions of Colorado. So it has been noted that, for instance, the Front Range is green, very green, from folks out there that are not used to seeing or haven't seen those conditions in a while. But it is going to dry out quite a bit, likely to dry out in that portion of the country. Looking at the June through August outlook, so we've got this bullseye of equal chances here across the western lakes, extending down into Missouri, with higher probability of above average to the east and also to the west. So much of us still carrying that warmer than average probability, except for that area of the Western Great Lakes down to Missouri. And again, the summer, although the confidence levels are certainly lower, right? 3-month period here, it does look drier west to wetter east, with a lot of equal opportunity, equal chances for either there across the middle. So with those conditions in mind, the new seasonal drought outlook, we do expect those current conditions, the current drought conditions, to remain steady here for the summertime, with slight expansion possible. Of course, we're getting into that time period where, you know, a lot of our precipitation across a good portion of the region comes through just daily convective thunderstorm activity, where the storm track is typically shifted a little bit farther north to our friends there across the northern tier. But right now it does look like the conditions are likely to see, we're likely to see drought remain or even expand over portions of Colorado, Nebraska, southern South Dakota, southern Montana, and northern Wyoming as well. So with that also in mind, thinking about the fire activity, now with the early melt out, low stream, just lack of precipitation in southwest Colorado right now, the high wildland fire danger is really present across that portion, southwest Colorado, for June, and expected to expand northward during July as we see that here. Now that's not to say that there's not opportunities for wildland fire elsewhere. Depending on what happens with the precipitation, certainly over the next 30 days, and whether any improvements can be seen across the Dakotas. The green up that we're seeing now will be relatively short-lived if we don't get some moisture into that part of the region. So let's wrap it up. Most of spring brought warm conditions in the east and cold conditions across our states in the west. May has been pretty chilly for the entire region here. We've also been generally drier across the northern tier states into the Great Lakes. Some worsening conditions there in across the Great Lakes region. Wetter conditions for our southern tier, Kansas to Kentucky. Big increases in temperatures this week, you know, going from these freeze conditions less than 14 days ago to temperatures close to 90 for many of us. We will be transitioning to much more higher demand for that moisture. So that could intensify some areas that are already dry across the country. We mentioned the potential low water impacts along the Missouri. Crops were planted efficiently this year, but we need some water and heating units now to get those crops up out of the ground and growing nicely. And so we still have that fire danger elevated across the northern states. We've got some help from the green up, for instance, across the Dakotas, but we need the rain. We need some help there on the hydro side. INSO neutral through summer. Too early to indicate what happens after that. Our June and summer outlooks reflect warmer conditions across much of the region, perhaps wet in the east and dry in the west. So drought fundamentally is not likely to improve across our region in any widespread sense here over the next 3 months. So I want to thank everyone for listening. Certainly all of our today and past recorded presentations, you can find at those links provided there. I want to thank the National Climate Data Center, or National, that should be updated, right? Monthly climate reports, NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, U.S. Drought Portal, and all of our regional climate centers and partners throughout the region. And if you have any questions, we're going to take those now. You can also reach out to me or any of our partners and coordinators, facilitators, Doug, Dennis, Mike, Natalie, and Brian. So with that, Doug, I will turn it back over to you. And I think I got it to 37 minutes today.
Yeah, we have a lot of time there. Thank you, Aaron, very much. We just have a few questions. Let me see here. Aaron, can you hear me pretty well? Is it coming through?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
Okay. Might be my speaker's not so good. Anyway, we had a couple questions. We'll start off with those, and then there's might be some other things that come out of this. We'll start with David Edict, and can you put me on a different so I don't have an echo there, Aaron? Or put headphones on or something, or maybe just yeah. Anyway, thanks. So he would like to see more nighttime temperature and graphics, and I'm not exactly sure what you meant other than minimum temperatures. And David, I don't know if you want to say something or if you're want to ask that question in a different way. Max, min. Okay, all right. So one thing I'll point out to anybody, if you go back to some of those earlier slides that you had, the state summary slides, at the very beginning, yeah. Yeah, any of them, right? So these all do exist. You can go to that website down below and pull up about anything you want all the way down to the county level. You can actually pull them up based on basins, sort of larger basins. You can do, like I said, county. You can do climate division. You can look at these in a lot of different ways. And you can also look at maximum temperatures. These are average temperatures that he's showing. You can look at minimum temperatures, maximum temperatures, and average. You can look at precip, and I guess you've shown that too in terms of rankings and such. So I'll offer that to you via that website down there below. That's one way to look at them, right? Anyway, I guess I'll offer that to you. And we can just leave that up there in case anybody wants to go check it out. So let's see, we got, just one clarification. There is a Maryville, Missouri, but not a Marysville. That's over in Kansas. You don't necessarily have to know that because you're from Ohio. Aaron, that's cool.
Too, so that's probably intuitive.
I think every state probably has a different version of that. So the question from Jerry Oster is La Nina dead and gone, and then what? And I think the quick answer to that is yes, it is for the most part gone. I think temperatures remain slightly cooler than normal, but they're trending toward, or they are in our classification system, basically neutral. So neither El Nino nor La Nina. There are some indications from models that we could slip back into La Nina, which would not be unprecedented by any means. So a couple years in a row of La Nina isn't out of the question, but it's too early to call that right now. I would say in about 2 months we should have a better handle on that. So probably in July. Next question is, what caused the drought conditions? Okay, yeah, what caused the drought conditions in North Central and Great Lakes region to become so entrenched? I'm open to either you, Aaron, or Brad to say a few words about that. I think, I mean, I have an answer, but I don't know if it's the right one. But you guys want to say something about that? Maybe Great Lakes, yeah, and North Central. It may be two different things because. Well, go ahead. You guys want to handle that? Go ahead.
I mean, I can take a stab at it if you want, Doug. This is Brad Rippey.
Sure, Brad.
Okay. And I know one thing that we've been watching for a number of months now is blocking high pressure over some of the higher latitudes like eastern Canada. And that has had an effect of suppressing the storm track. So we've seen a good number of storms moving through places like Nebraska, Colorado, and Kansas. But that moisture has not been able to reach northward to the northern tier because of that blocking high pressure that's been persistent more often than not. It's, it doesn't give you a cause for why that block is in place, but it certainly gives you a mechanism for why that moisture hasn't reached the northern U.S.
Yeah, Aaron, do you have anything to add?
Well, I would just add, we've been kind of noting just kind of the weird, we call it weird pattern, over the last several months. We had a period there after the big polar plunge where, we just had these numerous cutoff lows, kind of just meandering across the country as well. Since then, even here in the southern Great Lakes, we were pretty dry because the storm track just wasn't inching up. And that's what more recently, that rainfall has inched up. At least we've got some rain across northern Ohio, but as Jeff Andreessen up there in Michigan says, I'm not playing nice or sharing any of that moisture with him. And, sometimes when we get these persistence, as Brad was talking about, the persistent pattern set in, you could get pretty strong gradients in the moisture in precipitation. And that's what we've seen there. The difference between, say, Indiana and Ohio and Northeast Illinois up into Michigan.
Yeah, I think we haven't had as many, let's say, deep moisture events or deep Gulf moisture reaching as far north latitudes as we have had in the past, especially in the spring. So it's I saw a map a week ago showing we'll call it anomalously strong, actually pretty strong northeasterly flow across a lot of that area, which isn't necessarily very wet, sort of suppressing, if you will, any chance for that deep moisture from the Gulf to come up very far to the north. And certainly even here in Kansas City, where it's been relatively wet, we haven't seen until recently quite as much of that, I would say, high dew point or high moisture level content, moisture reaching north, which also may be one of the reasons we're not seeing as much severe weather and interaction between cold, warm, and moist air masses thus far.
Yeah, it's just been a flat.
What's that?
Yeah, it's just been a flat, very zonal flow, very strong westerly flow there across the midsection.
The other thing about some of the drought areas, especially way up north in the northern plains and in southern Canada for that matter, is that that drought didn't start this spring. In fact, a lot of dry areas started last fall or even late last summer. Things started getting dry there. We noticed them. We said, these are things we look at during that time of the year to sort of signal, watch out for this continuing type of thing. So we definitely were not overly surprised. We were hoping spring would bring more moisture, and like it usually does, up into those areas, but it hasn't materialized until, I guess, these last few days, where there's going to be quite a bit, at least in Montana, and maybe hopefully spread across portions of the north. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to fix it. All it does is sort of dampen it down for a while, pun intended. And hopefully we can get a series. What we really need is a series of wet storms moving through there, not just one-offs like these. Can you bring back the link to the GIS fire map in North Dakota again? Oh, yeah. I don't know which slide that was. It might have been your drought slide. The North Dakota, hotline. Is it? No, I think it was not that one. It was the one. Yeah. Yep. Okay, there's that, and we'll leave that up for a minute, and then a comment. So we had a disruption with the National Drought Monitor last week. Apparently there was a cyber attack. Thank you, Brian, for mentioning this, and we hope that everything is up running early next week. If anybody needs anything from the Drought Monitor group from the University of Nebraska, the National Drought Mitigation Center, and all the maps that they have, you can send an email to me or Brian Fuchs, if you happen to know him, and he'll get you what you need one way or the other. Is there soil moisture remaining from the record flooding? And yeah, okay, let's talk about that. So 2018, 2019 were super wet years across almost the entire north central part of the U.S. And because of that, we had extreme deep soil moisture. Brad, why don't you start off by talking about what happened in 2020 and more or less, if you will, where we're sitting in 2021 in terms of soil moisture. And I'm sort of saying this generally. Do you want to sort of tackle that or not?
Yeah, sure thing.
Okay.
Yeah, as recently as the spring of 2020, we still had some planting issues across the north central U.S., especially the Dakotas as we went through the summer of 2020, we started seeing that soil moisture profile reductions in the moisture there. And by the time we're coming into this spring, we have pretty much depleted what's left over from that exceptionally wet 2018, 2019 time period. There's maybe a few pockets in southeastern North Dakota and maybe northeastern South Dakota where there's still some lingering subsoil moisture, but effectively that is behind us now. And so those driest areas of North Dakota, northern South Dakota, and eastern Montana, you're not seeing a whole lot of moisture in the soil profile down a foot or two or more. So we've pretty much shed that extreme wetness from 2019 into early 2020.
And Aaron, do you want to talk a little bit about that in terms of the Midwest as well? Because we could talk about Iowa, Illinois, maybe Indiana, as a matter of, and Wisconsin for that matter. Yeah, I'm leaving out Minnesota, and Minnesota in terms of similar conditions, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, certainly, when, for instance, you know, if you look at a lot of those springs, 2018, 2017, 2019, even as, you know, 2019, no planting taking place across a large portion of that region because of those wet conditions. But for the large part, you know, stretching, for instance, here in the Eastern Corn Belt from central Illinois through northern Indiana into northern Ohio, the drought this season, the drought conditions that we had this season didn't start this season either. As a matter of fact, we can go all the way back to last spring that was a bit drier across those regions that perpetuated throughout the summer into the fall, and then the lack of the moisture throughout our winter season, despite expecting it from a La Nina, for instance, just contributed to those early season deficits in terms of precip and those drought conditions. And so, yeah, it's quite astonishing to see the flip, right? The big changes in our hydrology across the soils across the entire central and north central region. Yeah, and now we're beginning to now in this next growing season, we're beginning to start to tap some of the available moisture, and that deep moisture may or may not be as available as it has been the last few years. So that's another consideration. It certainly leads to better, or the higher likelihood of drought conditions occurring. You know, if we get 2 weeks of 90-degree weather in June without precipitation, you're going to see a lot more areas starting to, you know, have color, if you will, on the Drought Monitor map across the Midwest. So anyway. Yeah, and I think that's just the buffer, the cooler than average temperatures have had so far, you know.
Yep, and definitely the cooler than normal temperatures have held that back, if you will. Now, it hasn't really helped things grow fast, but in fact, the next question is about have there been adverse impacts to recently planted corn and soybeans from the drought conditions, where the drought conditions exist? And I think you've said a little bit about that on the presentation, right, Aaron?
Yeah, certainly there's a lot of areas where, you know, things got planted pretty quickly, but seeds are sitting there without moisture and unable to germinate. Over here in the eastern portion, it looks like, you know, folks that got in early April, stands look a lot better. For instance, those that went in, funny enough, right before the heavier rains finally returned here, that corn is looking pretty starved for nutrients, let's just say. So there, you know, there's some high variability across the region. I know we say that every year, but certainly some high variability because of those trends that we've seen. So we've got a combination of impacts that are, you know, the cooler temperatures, the lack of rainfall leading to poor germination in some areas, but then also some replant needs just because of the recent intrusion of moisture here across the east.
I don't have an answer to this one, so I'll throw it out there, and then I'll probably refer Evo to their nearest USGS Science Center, if you can find one. Any comments on groundwater impacts from the dry period? And I don't know if there's anything generally we can say about groundwater. I don't have any information offhand. Now, that said, the upper one of the things that the Corps of Engineers told us was that the runoff for May so far in May has been about 50% of normal for the upper Missouri River basin, which is above Sioux City, and that's an indication of base flows falling, right? And so wherever I think there was a streamflow map you showed, Aaron, that indicates some of those orange and yellow or whatever colors they were in various states, starting to show streamflow deficits, if you will, or below normal flows for the time of year that we're in. So you can see, yeah, those oranges and reds areas are probably tied to some groundwater and thus base flow, lack of base flow, I should say.
And Doug, up in the prairie pothole region, you know, that region kind of wears the groundwater on its sleeve because you see it in the form of the dugouts and the shallow lakes that dot the region. And we've heard a lot of reports of those being very low or drying up. So that's probably indicative of extremely low groundwater levels in parts of the Dakotas.
Yeah, we had some reports out of Illinois too of very deep well levels, near record levels there across Northwest Illinois. So just indicating that those low well groundwater levels there.
And Adnan, I'm having a bit of an issue sharing your, I think is that the same one, Adnan, that is interactive map for fires, I think that is. Anyway, let me just reply to you, and that will let people see it. This is, I think, for North Dakota. Hope folks can see the answer to that. Anyway, thank you, Adnan. And that's it for the questions. I think we're right at 2 o'clock. So any other comments from you guys?
Just always appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
Yeah, well, we really appreciate your time and effort putting that together. And thank you, Brad, for standing in for your comrade there in Iowa. I'm sure he'll be back next month, but you can always come back yourself, Brad.
Sure thing,
so,
Doug.
Thank you all. Yep, thank you all, and we'll see you in June for Stu Foster, the Kentucky State climatologist, sort of swan song. He's going to be retiring soon. So thank you all, and talk to you next month. Bye-bye.